All right, everyone, thank you for joining us today. It's right at 11, so we're going to go ahead and get started. This is our final webinar in our Confronting Climate Change series. I really hope that y'all have enjoyed it over the course of this semester. I think we've had some really good information. I think it's been really interesting. Our two speakers today are going to be Professor Kimberly Cox, who teaches government for us, and Professor Angela Thurman, who teaches economics and is also one of our department chairs. Kimberly, can we switch to the next slide? My name is Misty Wilson-Mertens. I am the Social Sciences Department Chair. I am just hosting today, so I'm introducing, and I will, in a minute, mute. For all the students that are here today, please make sure at the end of this, we're going to send you a link that you fill it out so you get credit for attending today. And then one last thing, we are busy putting together our spring series. So if there's a topic that you would like to see, or if there's something you're interested in us conversing about, please let us know. And with that, I'm going to hand this over to Professor Cox and to Professor Thurman. Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you. So hi, Angela. We're looking at our climate responsibilities, and as we've been going through, we've looked at the politics and economics, the history, and particular industries. And so now I think the big question is, what can we do? Because I don't know about you guys, but this feels like a very overwhelming topic to me sometimes. And I want to know how I, as one person, can make a difference or make a change. And in researching, I think if we all participate, that we can have an impact. I think there's questions on how much individually versus industry change, but I think there are some positives, and I think that's really the focus of this particular topic today. So the first thing in looking at how we can make a difference is we have to know what we're talking about and get informed. So I went in and did some digging and found 3 examples to share. And I'm going to start with the blue one on the far side, the IPCC report. It's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. This particular panel was created because I didn't know that they've been around for this long. They were created in 1988 by the World Meteorological Organization and the UN Environmental Program. And what they basically do is they provide to all governments at all levels. So all levels of government can participate and get this information. It's all over the world, but they provide data to help them prepare for environmental programs to benefit their citizens. So right now, the IPCC has 195 members. The United States is in that number. There are thousands of contributors, though, on the scientific side, and we have a lot of U.S. scientists also contributing to the reports that they put out. So these particular scientists, as they contribute data on different topics within climate, and then those data sets and reports are vetted. So everything is vetted and kind of looked over several times, it looks like. The data then is compiled into reports for the governments to use to develop environmental friendly policies. And on their site, you'll see the overall report, which is huge. I recommend, though, that on the site they break down if you're interested in a particular topic. For example, I looked into oceans and cryosphere, and I really had to educate myself because I didn't quite know. Once I looked at it, I was like, okay, I understand what that means. But it covers everything from mountainous regions where you have snow melt and that water that makes its way down into the waterways and eventually the oceans. It looked at islands, polar regions, and ice melt, ecosystems abatement within the oceans and the cryosphere. And it was really, really interesting. I don't know if anybody else has had a chance to look at the IPCC, either reports or summaries, but they do also have one on Central North America. And so if you go on the IPCC site, there's a map, and Texas is included in that section. And so I looked at that, and I'm going to got to get my little sheet here because I want to tell you exactly what it said is going to happen to us. They said there's going to be increases in drought and fire weather. And they said that's with high confidence. Then they projected also extreme precipitation, and they said that's very likely for us. Projected increases in river and pluvial, basically floodplain flooding. They had medium confidence in that. and increases in precipitation in the northern part during the winter as well. So more snow and ice is what that kind of came down to. And that was a medium confidence. And that was the IPCC report. And I don't know, Angela, if you've seen it or have any information on the IPCC. I know they came out there, I think it was their sixth study recently.
Yeah, there's a lot of interesting. I was going to post this, and I'm going to post this in the chat. There are a lot of studies and sort of documentaries that have been going out as a result of this, and they are all very interesting. And as far as what you can do. For example, I just put on the chat, there's one called Seaspiracy about the effects of overfishing in our oceans and how everything has a sort of a butterfly effect, if you will, meaning that one thing affects another thing, affects another thing, affects another thing. So what can you do if we're going to bring it back to that? You do tend to watch these things, and I will say that it seems very overwhelming. You watch this and it's very doom and gloom, and there's going to be famines, there's going to be droughts, there's going to be flooding, there's going to be all this. So I do think it's a great idea to look at these, but I also really like your idea about bringing it back to what can I do? What can one person do? Because it's so easy to look at this information and be completely overwhelmed. And then you think, well, what the heck? I'm just one person. I can't do anything because these are all these horrible projections. So I think it's a good idea not to get too wrapped up in some of these gigantic picture things and bring it back down to what can each one of us do individually.
Yeah, and that was what's interesting about the way they broke down some of the pieces is if you were, and I looked at it from when I was reading it, I thought from a work standpoint, if you were working in marine biology, for example, the oceans one would be great to look at, because then you could identify specific pieces. Okay, this is happening, and in my industry, this may be something we can get creative on. And so I think that's definitely when you're looking at these reports, maybe look at pieces that kind of speak to you for what your passion is. If you're an environmental person, or if you're working in a particular field, what would impact your particular field of work. And I think that's a good way to look at these reports, and that's the way I kind of looked at them, I'll be honest. um, the other report, this next one that I'm going to talk about on the slide, is the CDP ICLEI. It's a working together to beat the climate crisis. This one was interesting. Speaking of work, since if you being a government instructor and having worked in state government and all, this was the CDP. It's a nonprofit charity that has a global disclosure system, and it's used by companies, investors, but it's also used by cities, states, and regions that will work together to manage their environmental impact. So they take a more economic approach and couple that with data to look at what kind of economic/environmental action can be taken. So it's a little more practical, if that makes sense, if you're it's thinking of it from a business standpoint. And on this one, participants can disclose their data, but they can also go to the site and get guidance and support on if they have a specific question, which I liked. They have 125 countries, cities, etc., that participate. And I was curious if Fort Worth did. It does not, but Dallas and Austin were on there. Dallas was fairly new. They were just on there starting 2020. And so I think later in the talk, when I talk about some of Dallas's innovation that they're doing, that was on this site, which was kind of cool. And the last report was some of the universities are doing, since we're here at TCC, I was curious what universities are doing. And the University of Houston has a department, it's the Hobby School of Public Affairs, that puts out reports and does a lot of data and study to get informed. They had one on Texas policy and politics for 2021 that was really interesting. And if you go to that site, their site, if you scroll down, there's a carbon management report on climate change on carbon management. And the question they ask is, has the U.S. transcended partisanship on this issue? Which was really interesting to read. It said it looked at voters where they aligned and didn't on this topic. And basically, to sum it all up, the report said that there is bipartisan support from Republicans and Democrats for capping methane emissions, because that's what the report was mainly looking at, but that most didn't understand much about the science or the tools that would be needed to meet those goals. So again, it comes down to that idea of why we put this slide up here is one of the things you may need to do is get educated and get informed on, how you can. I think it's hard to understand what you can do if you don't understand some of the science behind it.
Yeah, I agree.
The next one is to look at what are others doing for inspiration. Again, I kind of took this as, if we go out into the work world, a lot of us are going to be working in different fields. That might be architecture, engineering, robotics, you name it. And there's so many cool things going on in cities. So I wanted to look at inspiration. So Paris, I picked. There's a ton, but I just picked 4 cities, 2 globally and 2 here in the U.S. So Paris is the home of the Paris Climate Accord. We probably all know that. And so they wanted to put their money where their mouth was to meet this goal. And so the city's given the green light to spend $305 million to revamp, for example, the Champs-Élysées, and I'm probably pronouncing that terribly, I apologize. They're going to turn the 1.4 mile strip from again, Place de la Concorde de Arc de Triomphe into a garden, and I'm sure I said that wrong again. They will have the space for cars, have more tree cover for shade, and encourage more small scale vendors to set up shops, which will help with economics too for small scale vendors. It's due to be completed by 2030. We will see. They are on track right now, they said. And they couple this with all their other green efforts with cleaning up city water and increasing bike lanes. Paris is going to look a lot different in the future, I think. So that was one. Los Angeles, the little gondola that you see there, the hillside gondolas, that one is a projected project. I did not see a date for it yet, but right now they're looking at 4 routes. And so to free up the LA traffic, apparently, I've never been to LA, but apparently the traffic is horrid. And so what they're hoping to do is put tourists and others outside the city. They'll park and they'll ride these gondolas in. And right now the 4 routes are going to be targeted mainly at tourists getting to major tourist spots. So I thought that was kind of cool. And you have some cities around the world that do this. Like I know Porto, Portugal, for one, has this where you can go across the river, for example, from side to side to the city. And there's a lot of cities around the world that do this kind of thing. Or think about Switzerland and their whole system that they have. Tokyo, we'll look at a video on this one. This was fascinating to me. They're going to build, in conjunction with Toyota, an AI-powered city with people living there. And so it's going to be the Woven City is what it's called. And it's going to be located about 62 miles from Tokyo. It's a prototype. It's going to be a living laboratory. So that's what it will have: scooters, self-driving vehicles, smart homes, high-tech healthcare, etc. And it reminded me, when I looked at it, of the Jetsons. I don't know why the Jetsons came up. I'm older, so the Jetsons cartoon, if you know what that is. And then the last one is New York City. This one, again, is a prototype recommendation. And so they've been having contests for big firms to come in and design what future building would look like. And so this is a green building on a massive scale. And they're hoping that it would reduce carbon in New York City's atmosphere. So Climeworks was the company, and the project is called Orca. Or no, that's the Iceland one. I'm sorry, I'm thinking about it. But anyway, this one, it's along the same lines as Climeworks Orca project in Iceland, where that one is up and running. So this building will actually take more out of the atmosphere than it's producing, and it's based off of the Orca project in Iceland right now, which is where CO2 is being filtered directly from the air and stored permanently underground. It's like the way they explained it seemed like a huge air vacuum system. So I don't know if you have any other examples, but those are some of the inspirations I looked at.
And those are all interesting. I would like to point out, for the European cities at least, those cities are all much more compact than the cities in the United States. So they don't have the automobile traffic that we do. A lot of the city centers are limited, like LA or Dallas, Fort Worth, any big city like that. They're a lot more spread out. So we do not have the infrastructure that the European cities have, where they have really good subways and metro. They have good mass transit that people take, and we really don't have that here. So that would certainly be something that I'm not saying it's a lot easier for Paris to do that than LA, but it is. It is a
Yeah.
lot easier because if people are dependent on their car because everything is so spread out, and then couple that with the fact that we don't have good mass transportation, but we could look to cities like, well, both Japan and China have really, really excellent trains that are all based on magnets. So they don't use fossil fuels, so they don't pollute. So, when we're looking at doing things going forward, I think that that's something that we need to look at is using more of a clean energy. But that also comes with trade-offs. So, I mean, when you talk about going to wind energy, millions of birds and bats are killed by those giant turbines every single year. And we really don't hear a lot about that. But last summer, when we had those rolling brownouts, it was because we were, no, I'm sorry, it was during the ice storm. It was because we were so dependent on green energy. Well, if the sun's not shining and the wind isn't blowing, you're kind of out of luck on that. So, it definitely, all of these things, economically speaking, everything comes with a trade-off. So we just have to ask ourselves, what are we willing to give up to get this next best thing?
Yeah, I think definitely I agree. Even when you look at governments and what governments can do as far as helping to fund some of this stuff, we're in a different place than Europe is. Europe's ahead of us, I think, in some ways. And again, I think it is easier for them because of the land mass difference. Let's just be honest about that. China, I think it'll be interesting to look at China. They're investing heavily. Now they can because their government is controlled differently than ours, but they're investing heavily in green technology. I think they're trying to get ahead of us. If that's my guess, politically when it comes to that. So it'll be interesting to see if they kind of drive this market in some ways for us. Our tech is much better here, but they're just spending a ton of money on it. I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with that, but it'll be interesting to watch. I think the Asian countries in particular.
Well, China is one of the worst polluters
Yes.
ever. And yeah, I mean, some of the things that they've done, there's an interesting book called The China Price, and it just basically talks about how, I'll put that in the notes, but how China can undercut us on pricing. And it's basically because they have no overseeing government agencies like OSHA. I mean, if you go in and you get your leg cut off in a Chinese factory, that's like, wow, that's really unfortunate, but you're going to lose your job and you're not going to get compensated at all. And they have damaged their rivers to such an extent that fishermen downstream, like for example in Vietnam, have lost their livelihood because all of the fish have died up and the rivers have dried up because they're so polluted. So that is something that needs to be addressed as well.
Yes.
The fact that some countries, their pollution has an overriding effect and affects their neighbors very negatively. And if the one country is huge, like China, what can these other countries do to mitigate the damage that's being caused? So it is very political as well.
Yes, definitely. And I think that's one thing governments, I'll talk about governments here in a minute, but they're going to have to figure out how they fund and tackle this and deal with pollution from neighbors. And it's not an easy, but I think, hopefully with new technology and new innovative thinking, I don't think it's going to be a quick fix, but maybe I do see hope, I guess is what I'm saying. And then, I'll show you this. This is the Woven City. It's 5 minutes. We're not going to watch the whole thing. I'll kind of just show the beginning of it. But it's interesting to see the innovation that is happening and people trying to think outside the box. How do we tackle these problems, all these economic and governmental issues on climate change? So I'll see if I can get this to work. Hopefully it does.
Everyone wants to know, when will cars truly drive themselves? When will they know what I'm thinking? When will they fly? And more importantly, when will cars actually transform into giant robots? Now, we might not be working on the Toyota Transformer, but we are focused on the future of connectivity, autonomy, shared mobility, and electrification, or CASE, as we call it. We thought, why not build a real city and have real people live in it and safety test all kind of technologies? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's what I'm here to announce today on this 175-acre site in Higashi-Fuji, Japan. We have decided to build a prototype town of the future where people live, work, play, and participate in a living laboratory. This is our vision.
So that's basically, you can watch the rest. If you just go into YouTube and put the Woven City, you'll get the video. They do go into a talk about more about the tech that they're going to be using, how they're also combining tech with green, trying to be more green and environmentally friendly. And so it was just kind of a good way to kind of show the innovation that's happening, I think, around the world, and that, it may be small, but it was interesting. I think my son was the one who showed me this video. He wants to go into mathematics, and he wants to work for a company that is extremely innovative. That's kind of his goal. And he was like, "This is so cool." He goes, imagine living and working in a green space like this." And I thought that was just kind of neat.
Yeah, it is. It is very neat, and it's. I think that's an admirable goal. So I think that's very cool. One thing, I hate to always be the naysayer here, but it is also worth pointing out, though, a lot of the countries that are making these great strides, if you have a country that's very homogenous, like Japan is, then it's easier to make policies when everybody's on the same page.
Sure.
Then if you have a country that's very divided, like, I don't know, the United States, then it's hard when people are not on the same page.
Yeah, I think, and I think that if they are going to do it from a standpoint of it working, it would have to be a small laboratory experiment like this. So you'd have to have a city say, okay, we're gonna build this, and they're gonna have to have funding and et cetera. It would not be something you could just jump in and do on a large scale, I think, especially in the US. I just don't see that in the immediate future, but as an experimental kind of lab situation where you see how do people interact, where they've got monitors and kind of looking at the climate impacts and all of that. That's I think a little more possible, but definitely not on a huge scale.
So too, a few years ago they had a big initiative where they would have entire cities, and they would do this thing to get fit. And that have like everybody would weigh in and everybody would put in what they were doing exercise wise. And the community really bought into that. I think that would be very exciting if we could get, cities smaller towns to buy into something like that, like you say, and use that as an example. And then once we saw the positive benefits of that, then I think other people would be more on board.
Yeah, and I'll show you. We'll watch one more short video, and I promise it's actually shorter than the one we just watched here in a minute. To how small steps can start the process. And I think when I was thinking about the videos and which ones I was going to show, the Tokyo Woven Project is kind of a wow futuristic thing in my mind. But the one coming up, small steps that cities can do, and I'll show you again. It's coming up. I apologize, I mentioned it now, but that one I think is more probably doable even on a larger scale. But this one, I have a once we understand the issue and see the potential, we got to encourage, as we kind of been talking about, governments to get together and do this. And governments, from looking at the CDP report, which I mentioned in one of the first slides, they're asking for more collaboration. So they said they need more collaboration between all levels of government, business, and the community, which is kind of what we were just talking about. For example, in the report, they say cities need more help because cities are home to 55% of the world's population, and that's going up. I think they're projecting to 60% in the next 5 to 10 years. And those cities make up 70% of global emissions, they say. So I think the hope is forward-thinking cities that will drive progress and competition up the ladder through regions, nation, and then worldwide. As I looked at this report, there were a couple of examples. The city of Bristol in the UK, for example, gathers climate change evidence to help inform and influence government policy and shares best practices with other regions within the UK. Another example is Rio de Janeiro is working proactively with other cities in Brazil to address the water threats it faces. And then I found a California example. It says, the state of California is offering incentives as well as imposing regulations to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from all sectors. So the idea is that working together, they can create more competition, more collaboration to better meet those climate goals. So that was one of the things that we need to, as citizens can do, is to encourage our governments to collaborate and work on these things more.
I agree.
Another thing is to know what your city and state specifically are doing. I think you got to know that. I looked at the Adaptation Clearinghouse site to see what Texas was up to. That's the one that has the green Texas in it. It says preparing for climate change in Texas on the slide. And on their site, they have a ton of information. They act as a network for policymakers concerned about climate to get together. And they have resources and data on water, coastal, transportation, infrastructure, public health, adaptation policies, law, and governance were kind of their main ones. So on the main page in the search bar, you can type in Texas and you get the picture I have. And I didn't find Fort Worth's adaptation plan. Again, Fort Worth didn't have a specific one, but Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, and Austin were all participants. And you could click on Dallas. It's kind of small there, but April 2020, the top green line under local and regional plans, you can click on that and you get Dallas's information. And they listed their project goals as making buildings more energy efficient and climate resilient, transforming the city to a zero waste community, ensuring all citizens in the city can breathe clean air. And they have incremental goals for 2030, 2040, and 2050. And the one goal in particular that was really cool was they're going to try to decrease urban heat, because if you've been to Dallas, you know it's a concrete jungle, by putting in more tree coverage, parks, and trails, which I thought was really, really cool. Tarrant County had on their site, you can see the Tarrant County Health was one of their main issues. They see climate issues as a health concern, and they had information on that, how you can protect yourself and responses that the city's doing. And then really cool was Fort Worth dimmed its lights just recently in November, this last month, to save migrating birds. So I thought that's cool you mentioned that. So they basically turned out the lights to help the birds in the migration pattern. And finally, the city of Fort Worth also has a sustainability page with programs and a task force listed. So I encourage all of us to go see what your city, your state, your counties are doing, because there's a lot of cool stuff out there that they're already working on.
Yeah, another thing that Fort Worth does twice a year, I think, is they have a trash bash, and people walk up and down the river and pick up trash, and it's great. There's community people from all over the place, like Boy Scout troops and Girl Scout troops, and companies bring out their people and they collect all that. So that's a lovely thing. And another thing that they've done, if you ever walk along the river path, you'll see that there's a lot of art up. So that is not technically, climate change, but it is about beautifying the city. And the thought is that that will bring more people out walking on the path means people are healthier. So yeah, I think Fort Worth is on the right track with that.
Oh, definitely. And then the next thing you can do is look at investments, rethink how we shop and invest. And so, for example, and this will be more your area here in a second, Angela, but when I found many investment companies and banks already have programs in place that recognize that individuals, businesses, and governments will be changing their practices due to climate change. And so what they're trying to do, it looks like to me, is get ahead of the curve, which I think is smart for business. So JP Morgan is the one I put up for the example, and they're part of a net zero asset managers program. And I'm gonna read their quote because I couldn't remember it off the top of my head, but they say that achieving net zero carbon emissions is no easy feat. It will require major innovation and investment. Therefore, it presents incredibly lucrative opportunities for the companies and countries that succeed. So I looked at their carbon transition US equity ETF investments, and they said that they employ a rules-based approach to determine how companies manage emissions, resource, and carbon-related risks. So that was the JP Morgan, which I think, when I looked at other banks, it looks like most of the big banks have this type of program in place already.
Yes, they do. I would caution anyone who is wanting to invest based on any one thing to do their homework, because you do have to realize that the bottom line motivation for any company is profit. So if you hear something like, oh, we're doing this to save the world, oh, we're doing this to be more PC or whatever, you need to realize that anytime any company does anything, it's because they want to increase their profit. So just because a company slaps, we're green on their label doesn't necessarily mean that they are. So if you're investing based on anything, whether it's, if you want to be like Rainbow Coalition, if you want to be gender neutral, if you want to be green, if you want to be whatever, and you want to invest based on that, because there's ETFs on every single thing I just mentioned, you need to make sure and do your homework and make sure it's not just lip service and they're actually doing something. So, like if you read this, it just like right there, it says we've made significant investments. Well, what does that mean? What is a significant investment? And we've enhanced our efforts. What does that mean? Because if you went from 0 to 1, well, that's an increase, right? So just be aware of that, and always question anything when someone gives a claim that we've done this or we've done that. You need to just question it if you're putting your money there.
Yeah, and I think it looks like that, and hopefully if you're investing, you have a someone helping you, I would say. But yeah, I think it looks like from the banks and all that, at least I guess the good news is they're thinking about it. But it seems new as well. So I would have caution looking at. I would definitely want to dig in more. The other thing, speaking of digging in, I would want to dig into the next one I gave, but I do see this a lot. This is Native Energy, and it's a company that basically helps individuals, businesses, and governmental entities offset their carbon footprint. And this is one I get. I guess again, I'm a little skeptical, but there were some big companies on their site. They had Aveda, Cliff Bar, Ben and Jerry's, and eBay, for example. That's just the ones I pulled as a sample, and they talk about basically how they're using native to help them offset and plan for offsetting their climate impact, if that makes sense. So if anything, it was fun to see they have a carbon calculator on there for individuals as well, and it's kind of fun to play with. I don't know again how accurate it is. I think you'd still have to do your research. They included things on mine like reducing food waste, eating a plant-rich diet, purchasing green energy vehicles, the stuff we know about. But it was definitely interesting to look at, and you do see more companies going, oh, we offset our carbon footprint, and that's why I picked this.
Yeah, and it's also worth noting that companies can purchase what are basically, let's just call it the right to pollute. Companies are allowed to purchase that on the open market between companies. So if, for example, I was a company that that polluted less than you did, I could sell you some of my carbon allowance. And that's a very interesting thing. So that is something that could be sold on the market. And so that's another thing to be aware of. Does it overall reduce all pollution, or does it just reallocate where pollution is coming from?
Yeah, it's almost like, and I'm not talking about cap and trade, but it almost like it caps it. It sets a I guess a bar for where it currently is, but I don't think it technically reduces, and from what I can tell. Yeah. Another thing I guess we can do if we're looking, at investments and how we, offset carbon, we can also look at how we live and work, just how we physically live and work. Again, some of this is going to have to be driven by governments and cities and all. So I have the picture of the bicycles there. That's Utrecht in the Netherlands. If you go on YouTube, there is a Street Smart, and if you put in Street Smart biking in Utrecht, you will see the coolest video of how they have shifted to more bike transportation. Again, they're set up for that easier. It's a more compact city, but it is really cool what can be done. And I think, again, if you're, trying to think forward or get ideas and inspiration, Utrecht, and there's another city in the Netherlands that does this a lot, and I can't remember what it is, but is one to look at. And the results basically are a much more beautiful and livable city as well for people, which I think, and healthier individuals because they're getting more exercise, etc. I'll show you the last video I'll show you here in a second is on lighting solutions. And Utrecht and the region that they work with also does the lighting that I'll show you here in a second. The kind of strange building that I have there is Vienna, Austria, which ranks as the #1 most livable city in the world on a regular basis. They have the Vienna Project. Again, it's much easier for them to do this, but I do know from researching another talk I did that cities like Seattle and New York and LA and all are looking to the Vienna Project to see if they can use any pieces of it. But they basically have a lot of government buy-in, and they've been doing this since the 1920s to create green buildings and very healthy livable spaces for populations. They have one of the lowest number of people living on the streets and without any housing in the world right now, and it's because of what they've been doing since 1920, which is kind of cool. The other thing is looking at where we work. Maybe if you want to work in an environmentally forward and green company, you can look these up. The ones that consistently came up, and Angela, you may know more, but I put the ones that they're 7th generation, Patagonia, Fat Tire, and Ben and Jerry's too came up. There were certain ones that consistently came up. And it was kind of fun to look at what they were doing. Again, I think you would need to do the research into these companies on each of their sites. Like, for example, Patagonia, they have a quote that says carbon neutral is not enough. And they say purchasing offsets to get carbon neutral doesn't erase the footprint we create and won't save us in the long run. If our goal was to cut emissions from our own and operated stores, offices, and distribution centers, we'd be good. But the bulk of our emissions, 95%, comes from our supply chain and materials manufacturing. So they say we take responsibility for it all. So they're basically looking at their whole supply chain, the whole kit and caboodle. They're looking at everything. Ben and Jerry's. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say Patagonia is very, very well known for putting their money where their mouth is. The owner of Patagonia, the founder, has purchased huge tracts of land in South America and donated the land to the countries to be set aside as undeveloped land. So they've done that. So I agree with you. There's a lot of talk from different companies, and they go, oh, well, we do this or we do that. Patagonia is one that I know for a fact they really do that. So if you are interested in that, then definitely you should shop for companies that do that, companies that have a very short supply chain. So those would be companies that, for example, there are companies that they buy the wool from the farmer, and then they make their product. That's a very, very short supply chain. So basically, the shorter the supply chain, the more able the company is to basically direct what goes on. The longer the supply chain, and think about maybe a car manufacturer where the different components are made in multiple different countries, and then they're just assembled in one place. That is a lot harder to direct. And of course, then that also brings up when another initiative that people try to do, buy local or buy USA, that is another sort of quagmire, because was it made in the USA, or was the final assembly just in the USA? Because most things are going to come in many different parts and they're put together here. So again, people have to do their homework. If you want to buy local, maybe you should buy extremely local rather than just look for, a made in the USA stamp on it.
Yeah, and I think if you're wanting to work for an environmental company too, you got to do your research and make sure they truly are, So, I mean, I think that's the way the future's going if you want to do it. Yeah. All right. So this one's it's a short video. It's smart street lighting in Utrecht. This is one I think is more, we're not gonna watch the whole 4 minutes, we're just gonna watch a couple minutes of it. Doable. It's a small project. It has input from the community members and the city itself, plus the region is working on it. So I thought it was kind of cool to see a small scale project that is environmentally friendly, that's innovative, that we can push our cities to technically do. I don't think this would be hard. So we'll watch this one.
By 2030, 60% of the world population will live in urban regions. This will also happen in Europe and the Netherlands. This brings along certain challenges. How do we create urban districts that are more sustainable and safe? The municipality of Utrecht has launched a pilot in the urban district Canal Island. Smart Street Lighting Utrecht, which is part of the European project IRIS. Within the IRIS project, different European cities work together on the same challenges, with the common goal to realize the sustainable urban district of the future.
We proberen echt samen met bewoners oplossingen te bedenken die ook voor die bewoners belangrijk zijn, die hun probleem oplossen.
Dus er reden hier veel start in Kanaaleiland, vooral 's avonds. Het bracht me op een idee om een licht zebrapad te maken.
Wat ik leuk vind aan het oplichtende zebrapad is dat het samen met de wijk is ontwikkeld. En dat ze ook de meerwaarde ervan zien. En dat lukt eigenlijk alleen als je ze aan de voorkant goed betrekt en mee laat denken over de oplossing.
Meer cohesie in de stad, dat je bij elkaar hoort en dat je elkaar helpt.
Deze masten die hier liggen, die komen naast de zebra te staan. Op het moment dat in het donker de voetgang aankomt, dan gaat de elektronica uiteindelijk zorgen dat de lichtmast feller gaat branden en dat ook de zebra op gaat lichten.
Positieve reacties hebben we wel gehad. Dus mensen blij waren dat er iets gebeurt en ook iets nieuws, dat vonden ze wel interessant.
Het ontwerp is helemaal gemaakt door de stadsingenieurs van de gemeente Utrecht. Citytech heeft die taak goed opgepakt. Steeds iedere keer weer iedereen erbij getrokken. Al die verschillende partijen. En dat maakt het project heel erg interessant en leerzaam.
Je ziet wel dat iedereen ook een beetje zoekende is natuurlijk in dit deel. Omdat het nog nooit eerder gedaan was.
Vanuit de theorie weten we hoe we een goede verlichtingssituatie moeten creëren. Vanuit de praktijk gaan we nu bekijken of we dat daadwerkelijk ook kunnen bereiken.
We hebben speciaal het armatuur ontwikkeld voor deze toepassing, zodat automobilisten de voetgangers goed en zichtbaar kunnen waarnemen.
The light masts next to the crossing are so-called smart poles. They detect pedestrians, measure car speeds, and communicate with the crossing so it lights up. Developments within the project made sure possibilities increased over time. The smart poles were enhanced with different sensors. An LED ring was also added, which lights up in blue or orange depending on the traffic situation. It does not stop there in the district of the future. Not only is the crossing unique, also the surrounding street lighting is upgraded and used in this pilot to further develop new technologies.
In de hele omgeving van deze...
And I'm going to stop there because he kind of gets into the light, but basically the monitors on there also, so they're looking at light pollution, they're looking at noise pollution, and they're collecting data on other types of pollution it's just really cool the monitors that they built into it to be able to be more green and sustainable. So stuff like that is where I think that, if we're being innovative in our cities here in the U.S., we could do stuff like this.
Yeah, that is very cool. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I'd love to see something like that. Being a downtown dweller.
Yes. And again, I think yes, it would cost money, but in the grand scheme of things, I think it would be an easier, achievable kind of small step kind of way forward. And also, gets buy-in from everybody that, like I said, the citizens, et cetera, which is cool.
Right.
The other thing we can do is use our voices, so we can let our city, state, and federal representatives know you're committed to sustainable environmental policies. But again, I think that goes back to us knowing exactly what those policies are, and understanding the science behind it and being informed. So, for example, you encourage your city leaders to set net zero targets and redirect buying power to zero carbon products. But how does that work? So I think that's where we got to have the information. We got to be informed. You can buy certain brands, research, or ask how they're sourced and produced. We talked about the supply chain issue. And I know social media is big. Use social media to call for change for certain companies to change their practices. I think we as consumers have a lot of pull sometimes if we band together to use our voice. Once you're informed, talk with your family and friends and community, get the conversation and the interest going. The more people know, the more excited people may get, to make these changes and to figure out how to do them in a way that is sustainable, but also economically viable for us all. And I think getting those conversations and interest going is really important. And then we can research candidates as we vote, look at where they stand on the issues, and use our vote to pick candidates that align with what we want on environmental issues.
I totally agree. I think that's such a good idea. What I would suggest that everyone do is, pick the thing that you're passionate about, and follow that up. For an example, a few years ago, it was suggested to some of the different airlines that they needed to find ways to cut down on the use of gas. American Airlines, they stopped painting their planes, which you think, well, what the heck? Well, if you think about it, all of the paint on an airplane adds a lot of weight. The more weight there is, the more gas they use. So simply by eliminating, basically, they saved money by not having to paint all their airplanes. If you look, the new American Airlines planes are all silver, and then they just have their logo. They saved a ton of money by not painting, and they save a lot of gas because their planes are now lighter. So that started with one person having that idea, just like in the example that you just played with the lights, that one little boy said, hey, I thought this would be a good idea. So I would just say, if someone has something that they're really passionate about, I think if you just follow that one idea through and get buy-in, that one person can make a difference.
Yeah, I know. And I mean, I'm going to use myself example, and this is from the later 90s when I was working for a manufacturing company, and they were looking at ways to save money. And it was a printing company, and the inks used to be, the chemicals in them were horrid, and they were changing over. And finally, it got to where the soy-based inks were a lot more economical for them to buy. And so we looked at, okay, will this change? How can we make this shift in the production process and do all of this? And working with regulators too on changing the web presses, catalytic converters, so that the emissions going through, the VOCs going through, would come down. All of these things that I never thought, to be honest, that I would ever be involved in with what job I was in. I kind of got yanked into it, and they just said, oh, you can help us with this. And I thought, okay. And it was because regulators were involved. That's why I got involved. But there are so many ways that you don't, I mean, you may not think that this will happen in your place of work or where you live, but if you're always kind of open to these opportunities where you can kind of say, hey, what about this? Or how can I use my voice to, change and make this happen? I think it's possible. But
I agree.
all right. And lastly, and I'll go through these pretty quick, is how do you find information on where your representatives stand? on different environmental, the National Environmental Scorecard, they are an interest group, but they've been around since 1970. They're the League of Conservation Voters. Sorry, I have a hard time saying that word. And if you look it up, you can see where environmental groups rank Texas elected officials. So on the map, you can see Texas in the middle overall compared to the other states. And on the list, you can see our Senate and House overall averages and then the individual scores for the members. So this is kind of a neat site to go to. I pulled two at the extremes. We have Representative Lizzie Fletcher who had a 100% score, and then John Cornyn had an 8% score. What's neat is if you look on below their pictures, there's a list. If you click on each of the underlined, it takes you to their votes and why they were scored this way. You can also look at all recent votes in the United States and what's going on. And so where it says Stone Manning confirmation, protecting Colorado's public canyons, you can click on those and get information on all of those different areas and the environmental impacts that this interest group is rating them. So again, they're an interest group, so you got to take it with, that, but it is a place to look. And then another one I like is Vote Smart. And Vote Smart, you can, I picked Jane Gray Nelson because she's one of my reps. So I can see who's funding her, which is kind of fun. And I can enter the politician's name, look at their ratings folder, track the politician's ratings and see who's funding them. I had to scroll down once I got to her little folder to the environmental tab, but then I can see, like, for example, Environmental Texas, where they rank her Sierra Club Texas League of Conservation Voters. And you can click on each of those and it gives you more information on the ratings as well, which is kind of neat. So those are a couple of sources if you're looking for, there's a lot out there, but those were two that were kind of easy to use where you could look up ratings from environmental interest groups, and then Vote Smart, which is kind of a voter interest group as well.
Yeah, that's a great idea. No, I was just going to say another way that people can get involved is if you're using this as a way to gather information. And this also gives you an idea of different special interest groups that you can become a part of if that's your passion.
Yeah, because a lot of times you're not sure which interest group would be the one you'd want to join. So that's a great idea. Kind of to wrap it up, this is one I just wanted to end with something fun, I guess. This is a potential museum that may come to Fort Worth. It's called Ecoplex, and you can go if you type in ecoplex.us. It's ECOPLEX. .us. They have a whole site. They don't have any videos, but I'm just going to hit this. It's going to give their little screenshot of what it would look like. But their proposal is to build Ecoplex. They're looking at Farrington Field, possibly that area. And it would be a think tank accelerator for the environmental non-governmental organizations and corporate sustainability here in Fort Worth. And they're hoping the center will attract business and education participation. They hope to partner with companies such as Ry-Ban, the electric car manufacturer, who's looking at possibly locating to Fort Worth. So I thought this was kind of cool. This may be on our radar. Who knows? I know that our chancellor, when I looked on the list of who was supporting this on the site, our chancellor's listed from TCCD. So as well as some of the other universities, UNT and all that are located here. So there's definitely college and university interest in what potentially could happen and how we as universities could partner, which I think was kind of cool.
That's very cool. Ecoplex. I'm going to put that in notes. So somebody wants to look at that. Yeah, I love the design. That's very cool. Very
definitely the star. I loved it, but they didn't have a video. I was hoping they had a little video a little bit. This was it. So I kind of pulled it, but I think that there's just so much to learn. If, looking at this and, at the end of this, and there's a lot of doom and gloom on it. And I agree that we have to be practical, but there's also exciting innovation and opportunity for us to learn more and to try to really dig into the puzzle of how we can be a part of changing how we live and work. And I think it's coming. I think the innovation part's coming whether we like it or not, so we might as well get on board. But I think how do we do it sustainably, economically, politically? Those will be the big questions.
Yeah, I agree. I think everyone just needs to, find out more about how to become involved, find your passion, then get involved and realize that you can make a difference. So, and, the more involved and knowledgeable each one of us are, then we can bring other people on and we can make a very positive difference in the economy and for the ecology of our country.
Definitely. And this was the last in our series of climate change for fall 2021. And as was said at the beginning, look for upcoming webinars on new topics in the spring of 2020. And I can't see the chat because I'm sharing my screen, but there should be a link in the chat to get credit. And if you have any questions, I guess also those can be put in the chat. Otherwise, we are done. And thank you guys so much.
Kimberly, did you send that link out to us?
Oh, I didn't do one.
Oh, okay.
I thought you did. I'm sorry.
Give me 2 minutes. I will have a link for you guys.
Sorry. I didn't hear back, so I didn't do one. I'm sorry. Were there any questions in the chat or?
I don't see any.
Okay.
And if anyone has a suggestion on things that they would like us to cover in future semesters, feel free to include that when you note your attendance.
Yeah, and if anybody, while we're waiting, has any ideas of how they are participating in environmental change or what they're looking forward to as far as innovation in this area, let us know. It's kind of cool. Like I said, there's a lot of interesting things happening out there.
I agree.
Link is in the chat, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Sorry about that, Misty. Sorry about the misunderstanding. You're fast on getting the forms.
All right. Well, if there are no more questions, the link is there. Please make sure that you note your attendance. And again, if you've got any suggestions for future semesters, we would love to hear that from you. Thank you so much for being a part of our webinar.